Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another webinar in our Market Access and International Approvals webinar series. My name is Crystal and I am part of the Certification and Approvals technical staff here at Vista Compliance Laboratories. Today, I'll be presenting to you the certification and approval regulations as well as the technical requirements for electrical equipment, electronics, and wireless product and device approvals in the United States. Vista Laboratories is an EMC and RF compliance test lab and product certification body, and we are experts in global regulatory approvals for radio frequency devices. So today, we will be going over the requirements for radio frequency and telecommunication approvals in the United States. In this webinar, we will provide an overview of the major topics necessary to understand to get your radio devices on the right track for authorization and distribution in the United States. If you have any questions on the topics presented today, or any other immediate questions regarding compliance testing and product certifications, you can reach us at info@vista-compliance.com. Without further ado, let's begin the presentation. So starting with a brief overview, what is the FCC? The FCC is the Federal Communications Commission that regulates communications by radio, television, wire, satellite, and cable. They also set the standard and enforce the communication laws in the United States of America. The radio frequency RF devices are required to be properly authorized under 47 CFR Part 2 prior to being marketed or imported to the United States. The Office of Engineering and Technology, OET, administers the Equipment Authorization Program under the authority delegated to it by the Commission. This program is one of the principal ways the Commission ensures that RF devices used in the United States operate effectively without causing harmful interference and otherwise complying with the Commission's rules. All RF devices are subjected to equipment authorization and must comply with the Commission's technical requirements prior to importation or marketing. The Policy and Rules Division conducts proceedings to develop policies and rules with respect to spectrum allocation and use, equipment authorization, and unlicensed devices. The Electromagnetic Compatibility Division plans and conducts studies on radio wave propagation and communications systems characteristics. The Labor Division is responsible for the evaluation of radio frequency devices. Radio frequency devices are often shown to RF devices in this webinar and on documents. The FCC has two different approval procedures for equipment authorization, and that's certification and supplier's declaration of conformity, SDOC. The required procedures depends on the type of equipment being authorized as specified in the applicable rule parts. In some instances, a device may have different functions, resulting in the device being subjected to more than one type of approval procedure. Let's start with certification. Certification is the more formal and thorough approval procedure, which applies to all RF devices as they have the greatest potential to cause harmful interference to radio services. It is an equipment authorization issued by an FCC-recognized telecommunication certification body, TCB, based on an evaluation of the supporting documentation and test data submitted by an applicant, for example, a manufacturer or importer. Testing may be performed by an FCC-recognized accredited testing laboratory, and information including the technical parameters and descriptive information for the certified equipment will be posted on a public database. Equipment that consists of only radio transmitters, not a transceiver, such as remote control transmitters, land mobile radio transmitters, and wireless medical telemetry transmitters are required to be approved using the certification procedure. Secondly, the Supplier's Declaration of Conformity, SDOC, is a procedure that requires the responsible party, usually a manufacturer, to be responsible for compliance and to ensure that the equipment complies with the appropriate technical standards. The responsible party, who must be located in the United States, is not required to file a formal equipment authorization application with a telecommunication certification body. Equipment that only contains digital circuitry and does not contain a radio transmitter, such as computer peripherals, microwave oven consumer ISM equipment, switching power supplies, LED light bulbs, radio receivers, and TV interference devices are subjected to approvals using the SDOC procedure or may optionally use the certification procedures. Equipment authorized under the SDOC procedure is not listed in the FCC database. However, the responsible party or any other party marketing the equipment must be able to provide the test reports and other information demonstrating compliance with the rules. And in addition, equipment subjected to approval using the SDOC procedures can also elect to use the certification procedures. Many products these days, for example, devices such as mobile phones, wireless local area networking equipment, notebook computers, and tablet computers, are a combination of radio transmitters requiring approval using the certification procedures and unintentionally digital circuitry required using the SDOC procedure. Okay, so now we know that our RF devices require authorization prior to import, sale, distribution, and operation within the U.S. Let's take a look at the equipment authorization process. The process is how the FCC ensures that RF devices used in the United States operate effectively without causing harmful interference and otherwise comply with Commission's rules. Here we can see the high-level view of the equipment authorization process. The first step is to determine the FCC rules that are applicable to your device. This consists of initially determining if the device is a radio frequency device regulated by the FCC and subject to the FCC rules that determine all applicable technical and administrative rules to apply to the device requiring an equipment authorization. If the device is subject to the FCC rules, then the next step, we must determine the specific type of equipment authorization that applies to the device. As explained in the last slide, there are two possible equipment authorizations procedures for your device, SDOC and certification. After that, the required tests must be performed to ensure the device complies with the applicable technical requirements. The qualifications of the testing laboratory used to demonstrate compliance is based on the approval procedures you are required to use. Equipment approval under the certification procedures is required to be tested by the FCC-recognized accredited testing laboratory, such as FCC Labs. Finally, after the testing is complete and your device is deemed to be in compliance with applicable rules, the equipment authorization approval procedure begins, and the equipment is authorized based on the approval procedures that applies to the device. The FCC regulates radio frequency devices contained in electrical devices that are capable of emitting radio frequency energy by radiation, conduction, and other means. These products have the potential to cause interference to radio services operating in the radio frequency range of 9 kHz to 3000 GHz. Devices operating in this frequency range are considered intentional radiators, which require equipment authorization by means of certification. Incidental radiators and unintentional radiators fall under the supplier's responsibility and are regulated by test lab evaluations and supplier's declaration of conformity. Intentional radiators and other categories such as ISM equipment and licensed radio equipment are covered under the certification process. These products generate and emit radio frequency energy. ISM equipment, or industrial, scientific, and medical equipment, are devices that use RF energy for purposes other than for radio and telecommunication. Some ISM equipment can use SDOC, depending on the specific rules that are applicable. For example, consumer ultrasonic equipment generating less than 500 watts and operating below 90 kHz and non-consumer ISM equipment are subject to supplier's declaration of conformity. Products that use licensed radio spectrum from fixed microwave links to cellular phones to mobile broadband services are considered RF devices and are subject to equipment authorization by certification. An incidental radiator is an electrical device that is not designed to intentionally use, intentionally generate, or intentionally emit radio frequency energy over 9 kHz. However, an incidental radiator may produce byproducts of radio emissions above 9 kHz and cause radio interference. These products are regulated under FCC Rules CFR Part 15 Subpart A. Examples will include AC and DC motors, mechanical light switches, basic electrical power tools, and many other electrical products containing no digital logic. A product classified as an incidental radiator device is not required to obtain an equipment authorization. Equipment authorization procedures is SDOC. It's optional, but if in doubt, feel free to contact us and ask. An unintentional radiator is a device that by design uses digital logic or electrical signals operating at radio frequencies for use within the product, or sends radio frequency signals by conduction to associated equipment via connecting wiring, but it is not intended to emit RF energy wirelessly by radiation or induction. Today, the majority of electrical products use digital logic operating between 9 kHz to 3000 kHz and are regulated under 47 CFR Part 15 Subpart B and G. These rules contain the requirements such as the test levels or limits for the results of the measurements. Examples of unintentional radiators include coffee pots, wristwatches, cash registers, personal computers, printers, telephones, garage door receivers, wireless temperature probe receivers, RF universal remote controls, and thousands of other types of common electrical equipment that rely on digital technology. This also includes many traditional products that were once classified as incidental radiators, like motors and basic electrical power tools that now use digital logic. Supplier's declaration of conformity is required for unintentional radiators, although products that contain only digital logic may also be specifically exempt from an equipment authorization under certain situations. Let's pause and recap to review what we've learned so far. Incidental radiators are not designed to intentionally use, intentionally generate, or intentionally emit radio frequency energy. Unintentional radiators use digital logic or electrical signals within the product, but is not intended to emit RF energy wirelessly. Next, we will take a further look into devices that intentionally generate and emit radio frequency energy, like industrial, scientific, and medical equipment, and products that use the licensed radio spectrum. An intentional radiator is a device that intentionally generates and emits radio frequency energy by radiation or induction that may be operated without an individual license. Intentional radiators are regulated under FCC Rules 47 CFR Part 15 Subpart C through F and H. And again, this is where you can find the criteria or threshold limits for a product to pass evaluation measurements. Examples of intentional radiators are easily found in wireless garage door openers, wireless microphones, RF universal remote control devices, cordless telephones, wireless alarm systems, Wi-Fi transmitters, Bluetooth radio devices, and radio transmitter modules. Any of these devices and devices like these will need the equipment authorization procedures of certification before use by the public. Industrial, scientific, and medical electronic electrical equipment is known as ISM equipment. This is when electronic electrical products are used for providing RF energy for other than telecommunications applications, such as for the production of physical, biological, or chemical effects, such as heating, ionizing of gases, mechanical vibrations, and acceleration of charged particles. These devices fall under the FCC Rule 47 CFR Part 18. Great examples of ISM equipment would be fluorescent lighting, halogen ballast, arc welders, microwave ovens, and medical diathermy machines. All of these are unique devices that provide a wide span of applications, so the equipment authorization procedures will need to be handled on a case-by-case basis depending on what it is and does. So both SDOC or certifications can be applicable. For equipment operating in licensed radio services, these products are the ones that use the licensed radio spectrum. This can range from fixed microwave links to cellular telephones to mobile broadband services and are considered radio frequency devices that are subject to equipment authorization. Some rule parts for licensed radio equipment are 47 CFR Part 96 for Citizens Band Radio Services, CBRS. For broadband radio services, BRS, that falls under Part 27. Part 22 is for cellular services, and Part 20 and 90 are for signal boosters. Some examples of licensed radio equipment are low-powered TV transmitters, cell phones and smartphones, base stations, licensed point-to-point microwave radios, private land mobile transmitters, aviation and marine radios, and radio transmitter modules. All these equipment authorizations will fall under certification. So to summarize, intentional radiators, ISM equipment, and licensed radio equipment requires approval under the certification procedures and requires to be tested by an FCC recognized accredited testing laboratory, as well as review all of the supporting information and evaluate results to determine if the product complies with the FCC requirements by a telecommunication certification body, or TCB. Finally, a grant of certification is issued by the TCB on the FCC's Equipment Authorizations electronic system. Intentional radiators and unintentional radiators fall under SDOC, which also requires testing, but it is the responsibility of the manufacturer to warrant that each unit of the equipment complies with the FCC rules and does not require TCB review. We had just touched on regulated products and the FCC rules containing the requirements. Now we will take a brief look at the measurements procedures used by testing laboratories to demonstrate compliance with the FCC rules. The measurement procedures can be classified as general EMC and radio equipment measurements procedures for unlicensed band operations, equipment operating in licensed radio services, and RF exposure measurements procedures for the measurement of the strength of electromagnetic fields. When making measurements to demonstrate compliance with the FCC rules, it is required to use the appropriate measurement methods as specified in the particular section of the FCC rules. For general EMC and RF measurement procedures, we have the measurement of UHF noise figures of TV for FCC Rule Part 15 for TV receivers. For Part 15B, unintentional radiators, the procedure is ANSI C63.4. The method of measurement of radio noise emissions from low-voltage electrical and electronic equipment in the range of 9 kHz to 40 GHz. Part 15C for intentional radiators following C63.10 procedures for compliance testing of unlicensed wireless devices. For unlicensed personal communications services, or UPCS, it's 63.10 17. The methods of measurements of the electromagnetic and operational compatibility of UPCS devices. For UNII and DFS measurements, we follow the FCC released publication 905462 for unlicensed National Information Infrastructure devices operating in the 5 GHz band, 5,250 MHz to 5,350 and 5,470 MHz to 5,725 MHz bands incorporating dynamic frequency selection. We use methods of measurements of radio noise emissions from industrial, scientific, and medical equipment for Part 18 ISM equipment. Looking at the requirements for applicants in general, it's 1 or 2 samples, depending on how the measurements go. More samples may be required. Within each category, the lead time for evaluation and measurements varies. It also further depends on the complexity, supported different interfaces, functionality, and radio technology types. General equipment takes 1 to 2 weeks if it contains only one radio technology, such as Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. Composite devices containing more than one tech, such as a combination of Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, will take longer. Lead times will increase significantly if SAR or DFS measurements are required. Sample requirements may also depend on the antenna type and if it's removable. Generally, separate samples are needed for the RF conducted part and the radiated measurements. Samples must also be able to sweep over the full spectrum continuously. If there are multiple radio functions, multiple samples will be required if each sample only supports a single radio function. The measurement process will naturally take longer if there is a need for troubleshooting. Here's a look at the testing requirements for supplier declaration of conformity. EMC emissions testing will be performed. Immunity testing is not required in the U.S. At least one sample in end-user operation mode, including all necessary accessories, is required for Part 15B EMC testing. Conducted emissions is required if there is an AC power supply included or Ethernet ports. All ports must be populated during testing. Radiated emissions is required for all devices. Approval process of suppliers' declaration of conformity. The responsible party, as specified in the rules, warrants that each unit of equipment complies with the applicable FCC rules. The responsible party maintains all of the required documentation demonstrates compliance with the applicable FCC rules. The responsible party prepares a compliance information statement to be supplied with the product at the time of marketing. The responsible party must be in the United States. We know that the FCC has 2 different approval procedures for equipment authorization, and that's certification and supplier's declaration of conformity, SDOC. We have just detailed the requirements for the SDOC approval scheme. Now, let's move on to the certification procedure. Here is a look at the testing requirements for certification. EMC emissions testing will be performed. Again, immunity testing is not required by the FCC. We require, additionally, a conducted and radiated form of the equipment. These must be equipped with software to control the radio performance. RF testing and RF exposure measurements are also performed. A list of various test items are provided here. Here's the approval process for certification. The manufacturer obtains an FCC registration number, FRN, for a device requiring certification. The FRN is a 10-digit number used to identify the individual organization doing business with the FCC. The same FRN will be reused for future approvals. After obtaining the FRN, the responsible party must obtain a guarantee code from the Commission by applying at the Guarantee Registration website. This guaranteed code will be a unique code for your product. Then you will file with a telecommunication certification body, TCB, with an application for a grant of certification. Once the TCB makes the decision to certify the product, the supporting information is uploaded to the FCC Equipment Authorization Electronic System EAS database. A grant of certification is issued by the TCB on the FCC Equipment Authorization Electronic System EAS database. Taking a look at the certification and review process, when all the required information has been received, our administrative review examines the documents to determine if all submittal information is complete, accurate, and correctly prepared for certification. A complete application is required before the technical review can begin and before the application can be processed. Once the administrative reviewer has determined that all necessary documents are present, the application documents will be forwarded to the technical reviewer. If information or documents are missing during the administrative review, the applicant will be informed about the administrative or technical information that is still needed. Next, a technical review shall be performed to determine if the applicant's test data and reports satisfy the applicant's requirements. Items relating to the conformance of the equipment to the necessary technical requirements shall be evaluated, including to, but not limited, testing procedure performed, test data, test equipment used including information about its calibration status, user's manual, schematics, and block diagrams supplied by the manufacturer, operational description, supporting descriptions, if necessary, plots and other data as needed. After completing the administrative review and the technical review, the findings from each shall be forwarded to the responsible person for certification. The responsible for certification shall analyze the findings and the recommendations from the administrative and technical revisions and then present a decision to the applicant and will review that the documents provided is complete to take a decision about the certification on the device. Here is a list of the technical documentation, supporting information, and results of the testing or evaluations that the TCB reviews to determine if the product complies with the FCC requirements. The Grant of Equipment Authorization certificate is shown on the right. Form 731 is the application form for FCC certification services. Authorization letter to allow a third party to submit the application and or to sign the application on behalf of the applicant. Confidentiality request letter, request for confidentiality of certain documents. A copy of the installation and operating instructions manual to be provided to the end user. A draft document is acceptable. Parts list, tune-up info, tune-up procedures over the power range and or specific operating power levels, applicable only to licensed radio devices. A brief description of the circuit functions of the device along with a statement describing how the device operates, including a description of the radio circuitry and how the radio signal is developed. A block diagram showing the frequency of all oscillators in the device. Pictures or sample drawings of the device should be provided, including FCC ID of the device. A photograph or picture indicating the label location of the device should be also provided. A report of measurements showing compliance with the pertinent FCC technical requirements. This report must identify the test procedures used, the date the measurements were made, the location where the measurements were made, and the device that was tested. RF exposure information details how the device complies with the FCC RF exposure requirements. It's common to require a few rounds of updates to forms and documents before finalizing the submission to the FCC. Now that we have described the requirements for certification and supplier's declaration of conformity, we will talk briefly about other relevant requirements and information. Modular approval. A radio transmitter module can apply for an FCC grant. Modules can be installed in different end-use products, referred to as a host product or host device, by the guarantee or other equipment manufacturer. Then the host product may not require additional testing or equipment authorization for the transmitter function provided by the specific module or other limited module device. modular approval are for tangible, clearly delineated devices that operate when installed within or attached to a host product in one of the following 4 physical configurations. The first one is singular modulo transmitter, a complete RF transmission subassembly designed to be incorporated into another device, compliance with FCC rules and policies independent of any host. Limited singular modular transmitter, constrained to specific hosts, constrained to associated grant conditions. Split modular transmitter, complies with the requirement for a singular modular transmitter, separated into a radio and controlled element section, compliance for a range of similar type hosts. Limited split modular transmitter, constrained to specific hosts, constrained to associated grant conditions. Host integration. When using certified transmitter modules, it is necessary for a host product manufacturer or host integrator to have a good understanding of RF and EMC concepts and principles and knowledge of FCC regulations. Considerations when integrating a module into a host end product. Unintentional radiator functions, co-locations, simultaneous transmissions, separate distance, output power, antenna gain, original modulars, integrations, installation instructions. It is still mandatory to account for all FCC compliance requirements. SDOC labeling. Product identification. The product identification, labeling, and compliance information requirements for a device subjected to SDOC requires that each device be uniquely identified. Compliance information. A compliance information statement that includes the following items. Identification of the product, e.g., trade name, model, etc. A statement that the product complies with the rules as applicable. The name and address and telephone number or internet contact information of the responsible party contact located in the United States. The FCC logo. It is optional to use the FCC logo to indicate compliance with the FCC rules. The logo may be included in the instruction manuals or as part of an e-label. E-labeling. E-labeling is allowed for devices with an integrated display. Certification labeling. FCC ID, guarantee code, product code, warning statement. When the device is so small for such use that it is not practical to place the statement on it, the information can be placed in a prominent location in the instruction manual. Label. The label shall be permanently affixed to the equipment and shall be readily visible to the purchaser at the time of purchase. Devices that have an integrated display may display the labeling information elsewhere. Manual. Unauthorized changes by the party responsible for compliance may void authority of operation. The user manual or instruction manual for an intentional radiator shall caution the user that changes or modifications not expressly approved by the party responsible for compliance could void the user's authority to operate the equipment. FCC responsibilities. It is the responsibility of the guarantee to maintain all documentation as part of the responsibility for the retention of records and to ensure that the manufactured products are in compliance. Maintain the records listed as follows: a record of the original design drawings, specifications, and all changes that have been made that may affect compliance with the standards and the requirements, a record of the procedures used for production inspections and testing to ensure conformance with the standards and the requirements, a record of the test results that demonstrate compliance with the appropriate regulations in this chapter. For equipment subjected to certification, records shall be retained for a 1-year period after the marketing of the associated equipment has been permanently discontinued, or until the conclusion of an investigation or a proceeding if the responsible party is officially notified that an investigation or any other administrative proceeding involving its equipment has been instituted. Importation of radio frequency equipment requires that the product either has the required FCC equipment authorization, is only being imported for evaluation purposes, is only being imported for demonstration at a trade show. For SDOCs, the importer is the responsible party. For certifications, the guarantee is the responsible party. FCC surveillance. FCC has severe penalties for non-compliance. Suppliers Declaration of Conformity, SDOC. The FCC has the right to request samples for inspection and submission of equipment for testing and the test records as per the retention of record rules. Certification. The FCC may request samples for certified equipment for FCC inspection. If compliance issues arises, the guarantee will be required to address those, or the grant may be subjected to revocation or withdrawal of the equipment authorization. Withdrawal will result in the item not being able to be imported, marketed, or sold in the United States. Applicants should make provisions to always have production samples available upon request by the TCB or by the FCC for auditing purposes for at least 1 year after the last production date. FCC permissive changes. When a device is modified, all proposed changes must be considered to determine the type of filing required. Changes to certified equipment are subjected to the permissive change requirements. Class 1. Equipment changes that do not degrade the data report to the FCC. Class 2. Equipment changes that do degrade the data report to the FCC. Examples: the addition of replacement or alternative antennas for Part 15 devices where a higher gain antenna is used or a different type of antenna is used. When a device changes the RF exposure conditions, when it is required to address co-location with other transmitter not covered by original application. Class 3. Changes in software for software-defined radio equipment.